it broke earlier this week. I'm sourcing the New York Times Brooks Barnes article. Recommend reading it. Definitely a good read. Like New York Times love their content. And they do a great job covering media and giving a good comprehensive look at like media stories and stuff like that. So that's why I use them as a good source for Sleepless. Anyway. This was a story that broke earlier last week, and I wanted to make sure I devoted some time to it because I haven't really talked about the events leading up to this. John Lasseter has now is confirmed that he will be leaving Disney. He will remain as part of the staff as a creative consultant for the remainder of the year, and then he's going to step down. So he's going to be taking a very limited role at Disney and, of course, their sister company, Pixar. This announcement, of course, comes right in lieu of the release of The Incredibles 2, the long-awaited Incredibles 2, that's coming out this coming weekend. So there's kind of a few things to unpack here. Now, I'm not sure how many people remember this, but it was a fairly decent-sized news story, but it came also at a time when a lot of other accusations were swirling, and it was just a very, even in some ways, convoluted time period just in terms of the deluge of information. But back in several months ago, about maybe 5 months ago, back when the Me Too movement was, really gaining traction, gaining momentum, Lasseter came out and he sent a company-wide email that apologized to, quote-unquote, anyone who has ever been on the receiving end of an unwanted hug or any other gesture they felt crossed the line in any way, shape, or form. And he took a 6-month sabbatical, citing several missteps as the reason why he would be leaving. One of the things that the New York Times article brings up, too, that's no real secret, is that Lasseter has always been known to be kind of a, for lack of a better term, touchy-feely person. He's always been into hugging. Apparently, he used to hug a lot of his associates and stuff like that. And I guess that has made some people, particularly women, uncomfortable. And it has also led to some of the accusations that have cited him grabbing, kissing, and making it condemnable behavior from Lasseter. So he's going to be out at Disney, and where does this leave Pixar? Where does this leave Disney? I got to be honest, John Lasseter, he deserves a ton of credit for why Pixar is what it is today. But if anything that this new decade, the 2010s, have showed us, it is that nothing is infallible. Very few things in this world are too big to fail. There was a time when I remember Pixar was always cited for being that guaranteed hit maker. Not only hit maker, they were always great with critics. They would always get 90s, high 80s, high 90s on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was just incredible, their run. They had Incredibles, then they had a Toy Story, all 3 Toy Story movies. They had just Monsters, Inc. They had a ton of stuff. And then in 2011, Cars 2 came out, and it sort of put an end to that. And it sort of put an end critically to that. Made a lot of money, made a lot of merchandising money, was not a critical success by any means, and a lot of people still consider it the worst Pixar movie. And John Lasseter also, despite this, pushed forward, was one of the men pushing forward for Cars 3. Which was better than Cars 2, but still didn't make a ton of money, and even the merchandising sales dipped. He was also one of the people that insisted on making a good dinosaur and really was adamant about bringing a good dinosaur to the screen, and it gave Pixar their first costly bomb in their rich legacy. So there comes a time, I believe, I've started stuff, is that, and stuff, is that, nobody is irreplaceable, especially in the film industry. There's always going to be new creative visions. I'm a big football fan, too. Love football. And you see it with coaches nowadays, too, in football. You see veteran coaches that are that we hawk over, like Marvin Lewis of the Cincinnati Bengals, Bill Belichick of the New England Patriots, Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We kind of hawk over them and stuff. Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks. We hawk over them. We're like, when are they going to retire? When are they going to get fired? Come on, they've had disappointing reigns here and there. When are we going to make room Matt Nagy's, you know what I mean? The Matt Nagy's, you know what I mean? When are we going to make room for these young, offensive-minded head coaches and stuff? Kyle Shanahan, these young, hot, millennial coaches. And you realize that, too, is that there's always in industries, there's always a perpetuation of trying to oust the previous person. And of course, this goes far deeper than any of those cases. A lot of that is just fandom, especially in sports, whereas in this, there was actually legitimate issues with John Lasseter. But you look at John Lasseter's track record recently, and you wonder where his mind has been. And it's come to the point, too, where it's like there was a good article in The Atlantic. There was a good article in The Atlantic by Christopher Orr. This was, I think, a year ago. And it was talking about how Disney could be the reason why, why Pixar has been weaker. You know what I mean? In recent years. And one of the assertions as to why this could have been is that Lasseter had really extended his involvement beyond Pixar. And in one of the first steps in doing that was Lasseter gravitating towards Disney Toon films, which were sort of like the early 2000s Disney movies that gave us like Lion King 1.5, Atlantis, Milo's Return. They were these shameless derivative sort of movies that didn't really that tried to be direct-to-DVD sequels to really beloved Disney ventures. They did not have a lot of the same voice cast. They didn't have a lot of the same writers. They were oftentimes mediocre attempts to capitalize on something more, some more successful than they would be. So you had that too. And then couple that, you had sort of the redirection in focusing on Cars, the insistence of Lasseter to focus on Cars, which had proven time and time again to be the most critically bipartisan, Pixar film of the time. You had that, and then you had sort of this string of, of what audiences largely considered to be okay but not great Pixar movies. You had A Good Dinosaur, which was generally just considered to be just okay. Brave, which was just okay. Monsters University, which a lot of people didn't, respond extremely well to. So you had of course you had your movies like Inside Out that got a lot of rave reviews. Coco last year has done, was really a great film and got a lot of great praise, deservedly so. But you had a lot of just intriguing things, and especially when you have Disney next door doing great films like Wreck-It Ralph, Big Hero 6, Frozen. You have them doing movies like that and stuff. And then you have, the Minions at their all-time popularity and stuff. So you really saw sort of Pixar showing how it really wasn't infallible. It was really, in a lot of ways, vulnerable. Now, the one point that I always remember that Christopher Orr brought up in this Atlantic piece was that Lasseter, to be quote-unquote corporate, redirect a little bit of his energy to be quote-unquote corporate synergy. And he noted that Lasseter had taken on a lot of roles that were more to the benefit of Disney than to the creative benefit of Pixar. One of the ways that Lasseter did this was he served as principal creative advisor for Walt Disney Imagineering. That's the same subsidiary that's responsible for designing theme park rides. And that's why it comes back to the point that I've asserted for a couple times on this show, is that the reason they're making Toy Story 4 is not because the world needs Toy Story 4. The world Toy Story movies that make a great trilogy. The reason why Toy Story movies that is coming into trilogy. The reason why Toy Story 4 is coming into fruition soon is because of the fact that the kid, you got to think, an 8-year-old nowadays who was born in 2010, believe it or not, has no attachment to Toy Story whatsoever. They were an infant. They were in diapers when Toy Story 3 came out. Toy Story, the original Toy Story, to a 7 or 8-year-old kid today is like the never-ending story to my generation, The Princess Bride. It's part of it, don't get me wrong. It's one of the movies that we've watched as a kid, but it's by no means one of the most principle-defining movies. Like I said a couple weeks ago on this show, too, how I said that kids nowadays are going to look up to these Star Wars movies that are coming out, too. The kids nowadays have very little attachment to Harry Potter. You know, I mean, it's still popular, but it's nowhere near the level of popularity when it was new. Harry Potter is always going to be, you know, part of the zeitgeist, at least in some, you know, in some measurable moment, but it's not going to be. The kids nowadays, they have no relationship. The reason, though, is that that I remember Christopher Orr asserted that. So the reason, though, is that that I remember Christopher Orr asserted in that great Atlantic piece is that John Lasseter became more concerned with the corporate side as opposed to the creative side, and Pixar has long predicated itself as a creative institution. So going forward, though, you know, Lasseter was definitely ostensibly, I mean, just by some of his investments, was way more concerned with positioning Disney as merchandising, die-cast cars, park rides, and concerned about merchandising, die-cast cars, collectibles, toys, trinkets, stuff to get the kiddies to buy, you know, get their parents to buy for them and stuff. And he started to grow more distant from the actual films because he was so concerned about the optics in a merchandising sense. And when you're Pixar, when you're working under Disney, I mean, that makes sense. You know what I mean? That makes sense. You're surrounded by a corporate conglomerate that cares about the bottom dollar and branching out. How can we ride these products? How can we ride these things until the wheel? Lasseter now being ousted from Pixar. Not, you know, stepping down, but let's be honest, being ousted. He was not coming back after these allegations, these very serious allegations, not to be taken lightly. He was not coming back. After these allegations and such, you know, you really got to think, though. It's like, it was, you know, if you believe everything happens for a reason, then I think that there's some. This was really what was going to be. Lasseter's time had expired, and this was really what was going to be for the natural progression. The interesting point here is that Pete Docter is rumored, according to the New York Times article that I mentioned earlier, Pete Docter is now rumored to have Pixar greater presence at Pixar, which I think would be really good. Okay. Pete Docter was the director of Up. He was the director of Inside Out. He was the director of Monsters, Inc., and he's been at least a storyboard, a lot of other Pixar movies, or producer even on a lot of other Pixar movies.